God's Basement is a first-person psychological horror game about a man confronting his past in a mysterious, incomprehensible space. Atmosphere. There's a low hum and a wind-like drone that fills your ears as you explore the office space at the start of the game. It's not really clear what you're doing, who you are, or what's going on, and the voice that speaks to you over the phone doesn't explain anything either. There's a lot of foreboding and nerve-wracking things, from doors creaking open unattended, to the voice on the phone warning you to ignore anything you see in the upcoming areas, and making you wait for him to unlock doors, leaving you feeling paranoid and vulnerable to something unseen. It relies heavily on being cryptic and the dark ambient music in the early game to reinforce this feeling of dread. It's not clear if any of the things you do have any impact on whether you progress or not, but the music keeps intensifying anyway.
I see you found your way to the Blue Room. I hope you didn't have too much trouble finding it. By the way, I forgot to mention who I am. Just call me the operator for now. It's not an official name, but I find it quite catchy. You're making great progress so far. We've been having some issues with the lights recently, so you'll need a flashlight.
Where the game falls apart is that some of the things you need to do to progress are so obtuse that if the game didn't have a feature that explains what to do, I'd still be playing it. It works on a timer, and the timer is so long that I'd often exhaust my options for progression before it would reveal to me what I was actually meant to do. This is frustrating, immersion breaking, and leaves the player hanging around waiting for much longer than necessary, and hurts the atmosphere badly. Sometimes you can figure it out and the atmosphere is enough to keep the feeling of dread going whilst you explore your options, but sometimes it's not enough to compensate for the boredom of waiting. Another thing that both aids and hurts the atmosphere is the operator, who at the start comes across as mysterious and knowing more than he lets on, but as the game progresses he keeps stopping you to explain the story to you over and over, and this drains the dread from the atmosphere completely.
James, it's been a while since our last encounter. That was a lot of information to absorb. I hope you got most of it, but I'll try to summarize the best that I can.
There's a great atmosphere under these things, but it keeps on falling apart by either being too obtuse for its own good or stopping the player to spoon-feed the story to them. That's no Harry Mason's. Scares. There's a ton of scripted events, from a radio being swept towards you from a dark office room to the unbearable sound of a child crying with no identifiable source. There's some sparse jump scares that caught me off guard, and a lot of ominous moments with the antagonist to keep you on edge. It tries a lot of unique things, but also the cryptic gameplay hurts the scares with moments like the one near the start, where the game's main antagonist just stands shaking in a room and you can visibly see her, but it's just not clear what you're meant to do to progress, and she just stands there doing nothing the whole time. It completely disarms her, breaks the immersion, and drains all the fear from the situation. It keeps walking the line between being frustrating and breaking the immersion completely. There are rooms where you expect something to happen in, and it generates so much dread that I had to push myself to enter them, but it also stops you to explain the story to you for 3 solid minutes, and this is just tedious. So despite it having some truly terrifying moments, it keeps on ruining it for itself. That's still no Harry Mason's. Sound design. The music is really great and layers these whispery, dark ambient tones that swirl up and down over the background hum that plays throughout the whole game. There's some areas where there's an uncomfortable noise like someone rubbing their bare hands on a balloon, the sound of things stretching and contorting, and it's muffled just enough so it sounds like the walls of your head are going to cave in. The sound effects are either generic stock effects which serve their purpose, or deeply unpleasant things like the aforementioned child crying and the frantic screams of the antagonist. The voice acting is really just the operator, whose voice is extremely monotone and often immersion breaking, with him going on for long periods of time, and even when he's seemingly trying to be impactful, he just fails to hit the mark. He has a few ominous lines, but has a few cheesy ones too. The directional audio is spot on and there's satisfactory reverb, but most of the environments are the same anyway. Really, the sound design is pretty good and only the operator drags things down. That's one Harry Mason. Gore. There's not really any gore, and the game didn't need any. That's 2 Harry Masons. Story. To begin with, the story isn't meant to be understood. It's not obvious until you start reading diary entries and it becomes pretty clear. The story isn't bad, it's something people can be sympathetic to, but what ruins it is how predictable it is. It's easy to tell what's going to happen after just a few diary entries, but what's worse is the way the game keeps on spelling it out and forcing the player to stand there and listen to the story that they've probably already figured out. I expect they didn't want people to miss it, but the diary entries make things abundantly clear. The game also forces you into doing a tedious and needless job to try and reinforce in the player what the character is feeling. But something like this isn't going to be effective on everyone, and the task was one of the easiest things to comprehend in the game, so it kind of fell flat for me. The ending, too, would be more shocking if the game made less of an effort to explain that it was going to happen. Overall, the story was okay, but the storytelling made it obnoxious, making the final score 2 out of 5 Harry Masons. The game is extremely cryptic in its gameplay, yet spends tons of time explaining the story to you, to the point where you're tired of hearing about it by the end of the game. It got a 2 out of 5 because it did some things extremely well, but fell over itself and managed to dip into boring in others. It's only great half of the time, which leads it to just being okay. Again, I'd like to remind you this whole thing is down to my opinion in horror games, and if you don't share this opinion, then that's cool, I get it. There'll be more horror reviews in the pipeline, and thanks for watching. And always go check out Bumps in the Middle of the Night. Peace.
Does it get tiring? Doing this job day after day, only